Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Sean, and today I am doing a review of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Kesey. First off, I think the birds are going to be noisy on this video, so I apologize for that in advance. Now, this book is not on the top 1000 list by James Mustich, 1000 Books to Read Before You Die, but I have seen the movie years ago and I wanted to read it because I like giving books that were made into movies a chance, because so often I think the movie is maybe more remembered than the book, like The Godfather or Forrest Gump, even though I think that's justified. I think the movie Forrest Gump was better than the book, but that's an aside. I like making sure writers get credit for what they do. So like when you say One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, most people would probably think of Jack Nicholson, but I think Kesey should get more credit because he's the book. He's the author. He's not the book. He's the one who came up with this. He did all the work, so he should get the credit. Not to discount Jack Nicholson. I think he did a fantastic performance in that movie. But still, as a writer myself, I like making sure writers get credit. So that is why I wanted to read the book. I've seen the movie years and years back, but I didn't remember much of it at all except the ending. And of course I have seen The Simpsons, where they spoof One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in an episode. So I kind of was already pretty well acquainted with the story. I assume most people are, but to quickly run through it, the story is about this convicted criminal named McMurphy, the character played by Jack Nicholson, who is sent to this mental asylum because they think he may be crazy, but he is just kind of using the craziness as an excuse to get out of prison and work. The asylum is ran by this head nurse named Nurse Ratched, and she is very tyrannical. She rules the asylum with an iron fist. And so McMurphy, Jack Nicholson's character, basically begins a sort of rebellion against her. He rebels against her authority, and so it's sort of a story about the rebel versus the tyrant. Jumping ahead a little bit, this is one of the parts of the story that, of course, I think is well done. Coming out of around the 60s and like the hippie movement, I think it's understandable why this would be such an important story to come out of that time, because it's such an era about protesting, overthrowing the establishment, the status quo, protesting rebels against tyrants and all that. So defying the authoritarian state. So I think it's a real popular story to come out of that time especially. So I do like and respect that. Starting out the book, it did not take me long, probably the first chapter, to be thinking this is probably heading toward a 5-star rating. It was just overall very well done, and it really sustained that through the entire book. So I enjoyed reading the whole thing. I read the entire book except for like 4 pages, to be honest. Basically, when it got to scenes where the narrator, who is the Indian, which is kind of curious, I think, but if you know how the story turns out, you'll understand why it is set from the Indian's perspective. But anyway, what was I going to say? I'm having a Biden moment here. Oh yeah, why I skipped certain parts about the Indian. At certain points, the narrator goes into some of his past and talks about his life before getting into the asylum, and I just didn't really care. I understand it may have been important background information, but still, I just didn't really care. I wanted the story to stay with McMurphy and in the present, so I just skimmed these scenes at first, and ultimately I wound up just skipping them. So altogether, I think I skipped about 4 pages of stuff. I don't think it mattered one way or the other. I still understood the story perfectly fine without reading these scenes, but that's just me. Okay, so anyway, throughout the whole book I was enjoying it, and I was definitely thinking this book would be a for sure 5-star book. Around that time, when I had about 100 pages left, I went to the bookstore browsing for books, and I saw this book, Sailor Song, signed by Kesey. So that's my signed book by Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I got that about a month and a half ago. I'm super proud about that, because I was liking the book, and so I was super excited to get a signed book by him. And if you've seen my channel before, you know what a sucker I am for signed books. Okay, so when I finished the book, I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to give it 5 stars, right? But then I kind of began to have second thoughts. And basically, here are my issues with the book. First off, the writing itself. I thought the writing was overall really good, but not like excellent. It wasn't what I would call beautiful writing or perfect writing like with some other books, which I won't mention now because I mention them in almost every video, it seems like. Anyway, so from a pure writing standpoint, I think it does everything it should do, but it's not a book where I would say, hey, you have to read this, it's beautifully written. So it's not like that. Because of that, that does not get a star knocked off. It would probably lower the rating from like 5 stars to like 4.8 maybe, but it would still definitely be rounded up to 5. So just a real minor knock against the book. The writing, although good and passable, it does everything it should do. It's not perfect. It's not excellent. I didn't love the writing itself. It's more the story itself is good. By the way, I didn't quite mention this. I think the characters are also really iconic. So the character of McMurphy, the rebel, and Nurse Ratched, the tyrant, are very well done. I think it's a very iconic characters that Kesey writes, so that's good as well. Another thing I want to give this book major props for is I think this book was really instrumental in helping to shut down mental asylums, especially like electric shock therapy and lobotomies, because at the time lobotomies were kind of seen as like this miracle of science, like you could just perform this surgery and it just wonderfully fixes patients and pacifies them and all this stuff. So I would definitely really respect that, because that's definitely a barbaric practice. And so if this book was instrumental in helping to get people to oppose that, that is great. That's another mark in this book's favor. The next major mark against the book. I think a lot of people may be tempted to think McMurphy is an admirable character, that he is the hero, that he's someone we root for, so that he is a good character. Birds. But here's the problem. McMurphy was either convicted or accused of sex with a minor, aka child rape, and that is why he was in prison. And I think in the book, it basically admits that that is true. He did do that. So he is a child rapist. Not only that, he is in this asylum because he is trying to get out of prison and the work crew. So he's basically faking this mental illness to get out of that. So all of that combined, a child rapist trying to get out of prison by going to this asylum, that is not an admirable character. That is a problem. Now, I did actually root for McMurphy in the story. So even though I knew his past and I knew he wasn't really a likable guy, truly, I still rooted for him. So this wasn't really like a book-crushing problem. But I think it is a problem for people who would want to idolize McMurphy. He's not a person to idolize. So this would probably get the book knocked down to like a 4.6 rating. But again, I would still probably round up to 5 stars at this point. Also, another problem, and again, this is minor, it would probably lower it to about a 4.5, but again, still rounding up to 5 stars. In the story, the Indian, the narrator, cannot, well, it's kind of given the implication that he cannot speak or hear, that he's deaf. So for most of the story, he's just kind of this silent presence in the corner observing everything. Even though the readers know at this point that the Indian can hear everything that's going on. And fairly soon into the book, McMurphy as well figures out that the Indian is lying, that he can hear everything. Here's the problem though. In the book, basically the Indian starts talking to people really kind of out of the blue. Towards the end of the story, he just starts talking to people and no one really notices. They don't make a big deal out of it or anything. They just kind of figure that, oh, he's been talking the whole time even though he hasn't. So this part of the story was really underwhelming because for this whole book, he is basically pretending to be deaf and to not speak. And when he finally does, no one cares. And so that's really underwhelming. So it's like, well, why was he doing that? I mean, what did that serve for the story? I know what it served. It allowed the narrator to be present for scenes that he wouldn't otherwise have been present for, so that way he could tell us what is going on in places that we cannot see. But I think that's just kind of cheap. Just that Kesey did it without any payoff. That the Indian all of a sudden just starts talking and no one cares. There's no ramifications for it. No one says like, oh, you can speak. He doesn't get in trouble for it. Nothing. It's just, it's okay. The Indian can speak. We don't care. We don't even notice. That's really underwhelming, and I thought that was kind of a flaw for the book. So again, that would probably lower it from like 4.6 to 4.5. But again, I'm still rounding up at this point. The final problem with the book for me is basically how the book presents masculinity and feminism. So reading the book, even though it's very clearly this story about this birds, this rebel character going against the establishment, birds. The book is very clear to me a sort of teardown of what the author sees as the feminism of the day. Basically, Nurse Ratched represents this female character who considers herself empowered over men. She neuters all the men around her. They're all emasculated, figuratively. So like the main doctor, he's just basically completely passive. He defers all his decisions to the nurse. The patients in the asylum are basically emasculated. They can't stand up for themselves. They just let this woman rule over them. And McMurphy is basically the guy with the balls, trying to get everyone else to grow a pair. And he's also very explicit with the Indian that he wants him to be a man again. He wants him to be big, is the way he puts it. So basically the entire book is about this woman who has control and emasculates all the men around her, figuratively. And so McMurphy is basically the man's man. He still has his manliness, and he is going to stand up to this woman. Also, Nurse Ratched, even though she is described as like this really big busted figure, she basically does everything she can to hide her sexuality. So there's probably more I could go into it about this, but basically it's a story about feminism in this way, where Nurse Ratched is like the bad side of feminism, where it's just she is lording over men and she is just tyrannical, and yeah. And McMurphy is the man trying to get everyone to man up and to be big and to go against this woman, to not let her control over them. Meanwhile, Kesey introduces a couple other female characters, and these are basically whores or prostitutes that McMurphy knows. And these, I think, is what Kesey would want us to believe that true feminism should be. These women are basically just objects. They exist solely for pleasure of men, so they could have sex. And these women are, of course, very open about their sexuality, and that's all they exist for. So you can very easily see the contrast. Nurse Ratched is a feminist who basically hides her sexuality and emasculates all the men around her. And then the whores are feminists in that they are just into free love, which, again, coming from the time, you could see why this would be a popular story to come out of that time, like free love and everything, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So these women just want to have sex. They just want to have fun. And so there's a very clear plot point in the book that McMurphy wants one of the women to sleep with one of the patients, because McMurphy thinks that will basically fix the patient. All he needs basically is to have a woman, and that will fix him. I'm actually going to put heavy spoilers here, so if you don't want to see that or you don't want to hear that, skip to the next scene. So, in the end of the book, McMurphy rapes Nurse Ratched. And by the way, that's another problem with his character. Not only is he a child rapist, he rapes the nurse. So, problem. Anyway, so when he does that, he tears her dress. And along the way, her breasts pop out. And when that happens, the narrator says that basically the whole asylum, all the patients get to see that behind her outfit, she is just a woman, just flesh and blood. She has boobs. The clear message here being, you should not fear women. You're a man and they are women. They are weak, because being a female is weak. Having boobs is weak. So this is why I say I have a problem with how the book portrays masculinity and feminism. So I understand what Kesey is doing, why he is doing it this way, and it's sort of a takedown of what he sees as feminism in the day, just kind of eroding masculine virtues or whatever, if you want to call it virtues. Anyway, so I understand what Kesey is going for. I understand this is the direction he wanted for the book. I understand what he's doing. I respect that in a way. But still, I just didn't really like it. I didn't think it's a real good message, especially like just having the only, quote, good female characters are prostitutes and they just exist as objects and that's their whole purpose. I just don't really like that. That's not a good story. That's not good characterization. So I didn't really pick up on this until like I finished the book and I thought about it some more and I was like, you know, this is really a book about masculinity versus feminism and not in a good way. So anyway, because of this, I would probably drop the book's rating to, I don't know what, but like 4.2, the low side of the 4s. So because of that, I give the book 4 stars. Overall, I think it's really good. It's enjoyable. I read the whole thing except for those like 4 pages. So all in all, I think it's a real good book. The writing is nicely done. It's a good story in that I like that it's this story about this rebel against this authoritarian. That's all good. I was rooting for McMurphy the whole time. So yeah, it's a good book. I think Kesey did a good job, but it's not a book I would want to spotlight as like one of the masterpiece books of all time. So all in all, I think it's just a good book, as is the movie. I think from what I recall, I think it's a good movie as well. It's a classic, so I would recommend really both of them. But since I am a writer and this is a channel about books, I definitely do recommend the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I enjoyed it, so it gets 4 stars from me. So anyway, that is it. Have you guys read this book? Have you seen the movie? What did you think? Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.